Paul, sorry, I will just let people know at this point as well, we are going to begin recording at this point. So if you would like, if you feel like you would like to turn off your cameras, that's fine. Or if there's anything that happens during the presentation today that you're uncomfortable with, you can let us know and we can take that out of the recording. Sorry, Paul, back to you, and we are now recording. Wonderful.
Thanks, John. So as John said, I'm going to provide some brief context on the origins of the soil programs that we're going to talk about in more detail and how they're dealing with the government's climate commitments. And a brief thing before we get into the detail, we know we've got a really broad range of people. When we're talking about soil carbon, we're talking about organic carbon and increases in organic carbon in the soil by increasing the input of organic matter, or putting it simply, getting more carbon into the soil than we're losing and keeping that over time. There's high potential for soil carbon to help with reducing emissions in Australia, and increasing soil carbon, I'm sure you all know, is a high priority for the Australian government. That's why we're here talking with you today. While there is that potential to increase soil carbon, it is constrained by things like soil type and rainfall, climate factors and land management. All those things have an important role in influencing the result and the productivity and environmental benefits that are associated with it. And of course, a key challenge in being able to determine those changes, account for soil carbon over time, is the high cost of soil carbon measurement. The government's recently released its long-term emissions reduction plan. So that was a whole of economy plan to achieve net zero emissions by 2050, which again, I'm sure you're all aware of. And it emphasised the importance of soil carbon sequestration in reaching net zero. And modelling for the plan underscored the substantial opportunities for farmers to voluntarily invest in soil carbon projects on their land. And this can provide landholders with additional revenue streams by generating offsets through planting, soil carbon, other management practices as well. Thanks, John. I was forgetting to move the slides. So crediting for these activities occurs through our emissions reduction fund, and that provides incentives for people to reduce emissions across the economy. And for soil carbon, land managers can be credited by increasing soil carbon by making changes to managing cropping, grazing and horticultural systems. And there are two soil carbon methods currently for being able to do that. There's a measurement-based method, and there is a default or model-based method as well. There are already more than 180 registered soil carbon projects under the scheme, and the industry indicates there's growing interest there. The Clean Energy Regulator is also developing a new soil carbon method, and that's expected to be delivered by the end of the year. And I know some of you on the call, or many of you possibly, have been closely involved in the development of the method. So that new method builds on the existing measurement-based method, and the aims to support increased uptake by increasing flexibility, as well as reducing the cost of measurement by allowing use of models. Next. Thank you.
Oh. Sorry, bear with us. The slides just came down and we're just catching back up there. There we go. There we go.
So we're talking about measurement, and so we know that industry's reported that the cost of measuring soil carbon abatement is the most important barrier to uptake of projects. And so to address the cost of measurement, the government set a stretch goal of reducing soil carbon measurement to $3 per hectare per year. That stretch goal was in the government's first low emissions technology statement at the release in September last year, and it was also
navigate and.
Okay.
Oh, Hannah will work on it there. Please keep yourselves on mute if possible while we're going through the presentation. So thank you.
And the second statement released earlier this month also talked about that stretch goal. So we know Australia is a world leader in soil carbon measurement, but as I've mentioned, soil carbon stocks vary with all those different range of factors. And so with our current information, it's difficult to predict the rate of soil carbon uptake for a different landscape and for different management practices as well. And so it's obvious that understanding that variability and accurately measuring the differences in soil carbon across that variability at the moment requires a lot of labour-intensive physical sampling. And so technologies that make it cheaper and easier will encourage more sequestration activities. That's the direction that we're looking to head. Thanks. So this gets us more to where we're talking about today, what the government's doing on accelerating deployment of soil carbon measurement technologies. The government's $50 million soil carbon innovation challenge, which my colleague Ingrid will speak to you about soon. We also have an $8 million soil carbon data program that we're getting underway. And then more broadly, the government's $215 million national soil strategy. And of course, the Clean Energy Finance Corporation's also investing in the agricultural technology sector. And we have CSIRO, Rural Research and Development Corporations and the CRC for High Performance Soils also investing in agricultural innovation, including soil carbon measurements. So we'll talk about the challenge more. On the National Soil Strategy, Lisa Nitsky from the Department of Agriculture, Water and the Environment will give you some more details about that and also its linkages to soil carbon. We wanted to emphasise we work very closely with our colleagues in that department on the links between these programs. They have a broader program, but there are strong links, and so we always, all the way through, work closely with them. I'd also like to mention we have Sean Knowles and Matt Walden from ARENA, Australian Renewable Energy Agency, with us today as well. So since 2012, ARENA supported innovation and new technologies in the renewable energy industry through over $1.8 billion in grant funding, and that's for more than 600 projects. ARENA is new to the soil carbon space, and it's investigating opportunities to support innovations and including around that measurement and verification aspect. And they're in the process of developing their approach to this, and they're consulting broadly with industry and government bodies and academics to do that. So the last point then on my introduction, the idea with this slide is to give a picture of how we see the different aspects of the government policies fitting together. So across carbon abatement, productivity, and also environmental resilience. And so before we go on to the programs, I just wanted to go through briefly what we talk about on what we look at in terms of the measurement and estimation technologies. So we talk about physical measurement, which I've mentioned, and then modelling and remote sensing. And we see that the most practical pathway to low-cost measurement will likely require an appropriate mixture of these technologies for a mixture that suits the environmental and land management context. Recent analysis that we published in the government's low emissions technology statement this year, earlier this month, indicated that achieving the stretch goal, our $3 per hectare per year stretch goal, assumes that with advances in modelling and remote sensing, reliable measurement will be possible with physical testing occurring as infrequently as much as 10 years. So that gives you an indication of where we think we're heading. And then, so just lastly, a couple of points on data collection. Obviously, data collection is essential for enabling these technologies. The technologies need the data for developing the prediction algorithms, defining accuracy and uncertainty. Need to be able to estimate those location-specific changes in soil carbon stocks over time. The work on the new ERF soil carbon measurement underlined that more work's needed to bring modelling approaches up to speed to meet these requirements. And this is why we're investing in some new work in resampling past sites where soil carbon samples were collected. So that's a really important underpinning bit of work that we're getting going. We also anticipate that participants in the Soil Carbon Innovation Challenge will be able to use data from our data program to test and validate the technologies. And then we also expect that additional data from those challenge participants will be able to be used more broadly. So we've got a broad picture of this range of data sources that will be able to come together. And we'll dig deeper into a data discussion in the second half of this session, and we'd welcome your ideas. Throughout the day, there'll be opportunities, as John already mentioned, for questions. If there are any initial questions now, we're happy to take them, but also we can come back through them later. But also, if there are a lot of questions and we don't get the opportunity today, you can email me and my team at the department as well, which is soil.carbon@industry.gov.au.
Wonderful. Thanks, Paul. So we do have a couple of people with their hand up. Before we bring on Ingrid, why don't, Susan, why don't we go to you? Do you have a question? Susan King. You're still on mute there. Oh, it might have been left up from before. Julia Mackay. No. Oh, might have been left up before as well. All right, thanks very much, Paul. Please welcome our next guest and presenter, Ingrid Chris from the Climate Change Division of Department of Industry, Science, Energy and Resources. Welcome, Ingrid. Thanks for joining us.
Great to be here. I'll get stuck in because I have a fair bit to cover.
Yep.
So as outlined by Paul, the government has committed $50 million to support the development and advancement of lower cost accurate soil carbon measurement technologies through the National Soil Carbon Innovation Challenge. We've been working closely with our colleagues at AusIndustry to deliver the program. We are responsible for the policy settings, while AusIndustry is responsible for delivering the grant process in collaboration with us. They are also online today and should be able to help with any technical grant system and process questions. I'll provide a brief overview of the program and details of the requirements as outlined in the guidelines of Stage 1. Stage 2 guidelines are under government consideration, so we'll only be able to provide certain information about this stage. Please remember that the eligibility and application details provided here are reflected in the guidelines document and only apply to Stage 1. You will need to check the Stage 2 guidelines and all the details in there when they are released to inform your Stage 2 applications, as there will be differences. Jump to the next slide. As you can see on this slide, the objectives of the program are to fast track the development of lower cost, accurate technical approaches to enable land managers to quantify the impact of their land management activities on soil organic carbon. They also aim to secure co-investment and foster partnerships that trial and deploy novel soil carbon measurement technological solutions. Partnerships are highly encouraged, and details on how to apply jointly and provide proof of partnerships are detailed in the guidelines. Co-investment is also a key element of the design. The Low Emissions Technology Statement has identified that widespread deployment of low emissions technologies will be mainly driven by the private sector. Therefore, in Stage 2 of the challenge, it is anticipated that the government will only fund part of a project, and the remaining contributions will be provided by the applicants and partners. You can see in the outcomes listed on the screen that there is an emphasis on technology solutions working in Australian environments. Tools from overseas could be eligible, but it is key that they are calibrated to Australian soil conditions and environments to ensure the utmost accuracy. Two of the outcomes focus on improved understanding and improved accounting, as we see this as an opportunity to utilise the data collected through these projects to fill gaps in knowledge and provide more data for validation of new technologies. I'll expand on this some more later in the presentation. As I mentioned, the program is being delivered in 2 stages, with the release of different grant guidelines for each. The eligible activities in each stage are reflective of the technology readiness levels, a benchmarking tool to track the progress of the development of specific technological innovations. The technology readiness levels can be used to frame your application and indicate what stage of development your technology is currently at. Stage 1 encompasses the conceptual technology development activities undertaken to determine the feasibility of your technology solution. If you have already moved through technology readiness level stages 1 to 3 and have undertaken the equivalent of a feasibility study, you can apply directly to Stage 2 without completing Stage 1. However, evidence of a feasibility study equivalent will be required for Stage 2. Stage 1 applications close at 5 p.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Saving Time on the 10th of December 2021. The feasibility studies will be run in 2022. Stage 2 will be open in the coming months and projects will run until June 2024. There are particular requirements to be eligible for a grant. Eligibility assessment occurs before merit assessment, and those applications that do not meet the eligibility requirements will not progress any further. The value of the grant funding sought can be between $50,000 to $100,000. Co-contributions for stage 1 are not mandatory, but the co-contributions and in-kind contributions will count in the merit assessment. We expect that competitive applications will leverage additional investment in the form of cash or in-kind contributions. Co-investment can come from state and territory government grants or project partners, where you offer to provide in-kind contributions such as labour, equipment or materials. You must calculate the equivalent dollar value in your application. We cannot fund your project if it receives funding from another Commonwealth Government grant. You can apply for a grant for your project under another Commonwealth program, but you must choose either this one or the other one. You are responsible for any eligible project expenditure not covered by the grant, plus any ineligible expenditure. The grant period is for 3 months and projects must be completed by the 31st of May 2022. Sorry. Just to touch on the last point on that slide, previous slide, sorry, John. An expert panel has been engaged to conduct the merit assessments and provide advice to the decision maker, who is the Minister for Industry, Energy and Emissions Reduction. And in terms of applicant eligibility, applicants must have an Australian business number and be one of the entities that have been listed on the slide. You should check the guidelines for ineligible applicants, which includes individuals, non-corporate Commonwealth entities and unincorporated associations. There's a couple of other additional eligibility requirements as well. We will only accept applications where you certify that your project is supported by your board or CEO and that you can complete the project and meet the costs of the project not covered by the grant funding. Where you certify that you will have or will have relevant intellectual property arrangements in place in order to undertake your project, and where you certify that you'll be willing to provide research data and outputs to the government and any nominated third party for the purposes of improving knowledge to quantify soil carbon under different management practices. We anticipate this is more likely to happen under stage 2. There is an opportunity, we'll cover the provision of data in more detail towards the end of the briefing. We cannot waive the eligibility criteria under any circumstances. Your project must have certain eligible activities and must test the feasibility of your solution to low cost and accurate soil carbon measurement and have at least $50,000 in eligible expenditure. Eligible activities may include developing a feasibility study outlining your proposed novel method to enable land managers to quantify the impact of their land management activities on soil organic carbon, collaborating with project partners to plan, design and construct the feasibility study, activities that assist in the collection or provision of data or research that is directly relevant to the feasibility study. This could include preliminary work on the technical viability of your solution, the novelty compared to current methods used, and the commercial potential and viability in Australian settings. We may also approve other activities. At risk of sounding like a broken record, the feasibility studies should outline the technical viability, its novelty compared to existing offerings, potential capabilities and partnerships that may be required to deliver your solution, the commercial potential in Australia and internationally, how you will measure the success, and any security issues you may anticipate. Just moving on to eligible expenditure. Eligible expenditure items are salaries and on-costs for personnel directly employed for project activities, staff training that supports the achievement of project outcomes, contract expenditure, where you may contract others to do activities, purchase or hire of equipment directly related to delivering your project, domestic travel, limited to the reasonable cost required to conduct agreed project and collaboration activities in Australia, and project input expenses relevant to the completion of a feasibility study. If your application is successful, we may ask that you verify project costs that you've provided in your application and provide quotes for major costs. Please note that not all expenditure in your project may be eligible, and the program delegate makes the final decision on what is eligible expenditure. But a good guide to follow is that the expenditure must be a direct cost of your project, and that the expenditure must occur between the project start and end date for it to be eligible. There's also a number of ineligible expenditure items. So this includes project costs that are not directly related to your feasibility study, costs associated with land, activities, equipment, services or supplies that are already being supported by other sources, routine operational expenses that you may already be paying for, such as accommodation, office computing facilities, printing, stationery, postage, legal and accounting fees, capital expenditure for the purchase of assets such as office furniture and equipment, motor vehicles, computers, printers or photocopiers not directly relating to the project, insurance costs, overseas travel and costs incurred in the preparation of a grant application or related documentation. You can see on this slide the basic assessment process. Before applying, we recommend that you not only read through the guidelines, but also the sample application form and grant agreement. Your application will be submitted through the Innovation Challenge page on business.gov.au. The online form captures the information required by the department to assess and manage your application. The sample application form document provides tips and guidance when using this portal. It also indicates word limits and what questions will be free text if you would like to work on your application outside the system. Some important things to note about the system is that it's best used on browsers Firefox, Chrome and Safari. Please save your work often, as the portal will time out after 30 minutes. You can invite others to assist in completing your application. There will be mandatory questions and you must complete every page of the application before you submit. We recommend you retain a copy of your application for your own records, and you are responsible for making sure the application is complete and accurate. We understand some organisations may want to join together as a group to deliver a project. In these circumstances, you must appoint a lead organisation. Only the lead organisation can submit the application form and enter into a grant agreement with the Commonwealth. The application should identify all members of the proposed group and include a letter of support from each of the project partners. Once your application is submitted, we move on to an eligibility check. AusIndustry will review your application against the eligibility criteria and the guidelines, and then if it is eligible, it will be assessed against the assessment criteria. This merit assessment will be undertaken by an expert assessment committee. They will look at your application and assess it based on how well it meets the criteria, how it compares to other applications, and whether it provides value for money. When assessing value for money, the committee will also have regard to the overall objectives of the grant opportunity, the evidence provided to demonstrate how your project contributes to meeting those objectives, and the relative value of the grant source sought. You may be contacted to clarify or correct errors, but you cannot add or alter your application once it's submitted. The Minister makes a decision on which grants to approve, taking into account the recommendations of the committee and the availability of grant funds. The Minister's decision is final, including the grant approval, the grant funding to be awarded, and any conditions attached to the offer of grant funding. On the next slide, you will see the expected timing for this grant opportunity. The projects should begin around February 2022 and will need to be finished by May 2022. As I flagged, there's a number of assessment criterion that will be used in the merit assessment. and there's a different weighting given to each criterion. You'll be asked to submit responses against each of these, and the amount of detail and supporting evidence you provide should be commensurate with the project size, complexity, and the grant amount requested. We recommend defining, quantifying, and providing evidence to support your answers. Only applications that score at least 50% against each of the assessment criteria will be considered for funding, as these are deemed to represent best value for money. Under assessment criterion 1, for 30 points, you will need to outline how your proposed solution could provide lower cost and accurate soil carbon measurement. You should demonstrate this by identifying how your proposed solution will meet the challenge, how it complements, builds on, and utilises current research, and how it is different to or improving what is already in the market. For assessment criterion 2, for 30 points, outline the market opportunity of your proposed solution. This includes information such as the market need, the landscapes and management contexts it will be used in, your plan to deliver and the route to local or global markets, and how you'll measure the success of your project. We will probably be asking for more detailed commercialisation planning in stage 2. Under assessment criterion 3, for 30 points, we ask that you outline you and your team's capacity, capability and resources to deliver the project, including track record in managing similar projects or access to personnel with the right skills and experience, your access or future access to any infrastructure, capital equipment, technology and intellectual property, and how you plan to manage and monitor the project, including mitigating delivery risks and secure any required regulatory approvals. And finally, under assessment criterion 4, for 10 points, we request that you outline the impact of the grant funding, including the quantum of co-investment, how the grant will impact your project scope, including the likelihood your project would not proceed without the grant, the predicted environmental, social, scientific and technological outcomes of your proposed approach, and any additional investment the grant will leverage, and an explanation of how this benefits your project. Successful applications will enter into a legally binding agreement with the Commonwealth. A sample grant agreement is available on business.gov.au. The grant agreement has general terms and conditions that cannot be changed, and it will be executed before we can make any payments. We request that activities do not begin until the grant agreement is signed. 100% of the grant is paid on execution, and there will be reporting requirements on how you spend the funds at the completion of the project. These are the reporting requirements just mentioned, and this includes evidence as documented in the grant agreement, the total expenditure, and must be submitted by the due date. We may also ask for ad hoc and audit reports if the circumstances require. We recognise that unexpected events can happen and variation can assist to help you to deliver the project. However, it should be noted that variations are only for certain elements and may not always be successful, depending on the different details that have been outlined in this slide. Please note that variations do not allow for an increase in grant funds. As part of the application process, you'll be asked to declare perceived or existing conflicts of interest, as will committee members who are assessing the projects and other officials involved in the process. Please note we require certain information from you, and unless it is marked as personal or confidential, we may share this for research, to announce grants, or to evaluate the program in the future. In terms of confidential information, please identify which information is confidential and why in your application. However, it should be noted, we may need to disclose this information if required by law or if you agree to it being disclosed. In terms of personal information, we understand we will be receiving personal information and we will treat it in accordance with the Australian Privacy Principles and the Privacy Act of 1988. Please note that all documents we have are subject to Freedom of Information laws. If a Freedom of Information request is made, the release of documents could occur after consultation with you. Please also note that national security is a priority and you must disclose all foreign ownership and foreign affiliations in submitting an application. Any changes to the project must be reported, and we may ask for a risk assessment plan as a condition of the funding. As outlined earlier, to be eligible for this opportunity, you must certify you'll be willing to provide research data and outputs to the government or a nominated third party to improve knowledge on soil carbon. As flagged by Paul, measurement technologies need soil carbon data for generating prediction algorithms and defining accuracy and uncertainty. Should your project be collecting this during the testing and validation activities during stage 2, we would like to ensure this validation data is made publicly available or provided to online government repositories. We plan to release further guidance on data collection and provision with the stage 2 guidelines. But we're keen to hear from you about this approach and key considerations for the development of the data protocol to inform its development. In regards to the interaction between this program and the Emissions Reduction Fund, we highly recommend that if you're working with landholders who wish to undertake management practice activities in the same areas of land that could be included in an ARF soil carbon project, that these landholders should consider registering their soil carbon project before commencing any new management activity. This will mean that any increases in soil carbon gained because of this new management activity may be eligible for crediting under the Emissions Reduction Fund. In addition, if soil carbon testing is undertaken as part of participating in the challenge, it could be used in reporting the landholders' creditable increases in soil carbon. If the landholder registers the soil carbon project during or after undertaking any new management activities under the challenge, then they will need to undertake baseline sampling and start new additional activities after applying to register the ARF project, which is in line with the usual project eligibility requirements under the Emissions Reduction Fund. We highly recommend talking to the Clean Energy Regulator prior to working with landholders to nut some of these details and complicated details out. This final slide includes key ways to send through questions and inquiries on business.gov.au. Please don't hesitate to reach out, especially if your questions are not covered today. Now you can take any questions.
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks very much, and well done. Great job. There is a great conversation going on in the chat there. Some questions being asked and responses coming straight through from the team that are here connecting. Jackie, I might just throw over to you from Oz Industry, because you answered Warwick's question there, so you might be able to just expand on how people can get in touch to clarify some of the things around structure limitations for these grants.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Yes, I'm the program manager working with the department on the delivery of this. I do know sometimes people are slightly, there can be some complex business structures. So happy for them to send it through. I've put our direct email, which is the lowemissionsgrants@industry.gov.au. Rather than going through the contact centre, they'll probably escalate it to us anyway. And given the tight timelines, probably best that way we can pick it up, and if we need to clarify or get any more information, again, it does seem fairly clear in the eligibility guidelines about being an entity incorporated within Australia, but as I said, if there's anything that you're thinking and you just want to double check, then please send it through to us.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. And we had a question from Jane as well. About some market research. Not sure someone else is controlling screen share there. But Michael, I might throw it over to you so you could respond to that about the projects underway with Soil CRC.
Listen, I answered the question because she because Jane specifically mentioned the source CRC, but I think the question's more broader back to the team in Canberra about the market research. I just responded from the source CRC perspective that we're not doing anything in this space.
Yeah, well, wonderful. Jane, would you like to ask your question?
So to be clear, I wasn't speaking on behalf of DESA, of the department.
Yep, no worries. If you would like to ask a question, you can throw your hand up there and we will throw it to you. We've got a few more minutes there. There we go. Thanks, Daniel. We've got one coming through. What will be the eligibility for grants for companies not based in Australia in stage 2?
We can't comment on that at this stage, but it is fairly common in grant guidelines to require all companies to have an ABN. So that's sort of a very standard approach across the board.
No problem. Thank you. And there's another question from Camelia there. So are CRC eligible partners on projects?
Yeah, so in terms of CRCs, we recognise that it's 50% Commonwealth and also industry investment. The real thing here is that making sure that activities that are being funded under your application are not being funded elsewhere by the Commonwealth. So if a CRC was undertaking the same activities and using their Commonwealth funding to pay for that, then it would not be eligible under our program. But yeah, so really making that delineation between activities and making sure you're not getting lots of funding for the same thing.
Great. And Max had a question around, could you repeat how long stage 1 and stage 2 projects can last?
Yeah, sure. So stage 1, in your application, you'll tell us how long you would like the funding to be for, but given the timeframes, our estimation of how long a feasibility study would take is about 3 months. And then there's project should be finished by May 2022. And again, under stage 2, you'll suggest how long you need to deliver your project. But projects under stage 2 can be delivered until June 2024.
And please keep all your questions coming through. Again, we will be going to breakout groups for some smaller discussions later on, and the Think Place team will be capturing all of this as well. So anything that's put in the chat, we will bundle up, put together, and be able to circulate and get some answers back to people. We do have time maybe for one more from Norman Marshall. Would you like to ask your question to the group, please?
Yes, there's been discussions about the baseline soil testing and the need for the project to be registered before you do the baseline soil testing. Well, under the new methodology, one of the considerations that had been discussed at numerous considerations and discussions with the department was that the baseline could now, under the new methodology, be conducted prior to registration. So I'm not sure if that is going to still be in the new methodology, but it certainly was a consideration.
Yeah, thanks, Norman. So we're not covering the new soil carbon methodology today. So when that comes out, we recommend you check the requirements under that methodology. And any new projects that need to be registered with the Clean Energy Regulator will need to follow those guidelines.
Great. Thank you so much. Okay, we are going to now shift departments a little bit and connect with some of the other work going on across government and how all of this fits together. Please welcome our next speaker, Lisa Netschik, who's the Assistant Secretary of Soils and Natural Based Solutions of the Climate Adaptation and Resilience Division of the Department of Agriculture, Water and the Environment. Welcome. And I will I'll bring your screen up there for you and your slides.
Thank you so much for that. And I only have one slide today. You'll be pleased to know, seeing we're really not the main game in town. But I did just want to take this opportunity to do a bit of a summary and an update on the National Soil Strategy and the associated budget measures. No, that is definitely not it. And the reason why I did want to do that today is because, as Paul noted at the outset, we are really working in very strong partnership across the Commonwealth on a number of common goals. And, you know, many of the programs that we run are unified by the problems they're trying to solve. And soils are a great example of that. As I'm sure you're aware, healthy soils act as carbon sinks. They improve our climate resilience, they offset carbon emissions, and globally soil removes around 25% of fossil fuel emissions from the atmosphere every year. And of course, healthy soils underpin all of our agricultural systems, our ecological systems, and are of course an ecosystem in their own right. And a recognition of that, the Australian government released in May this year the National Soil Strategy. Now, if you haven't had the chance to have a look at the strategy, it is a 20-year strategy that sets out the vision of how Australia is going to value, manage and improve its soil going forward. And the development of that strategy was a key piece. It's the first time we've done it as a nation. It was overseen by our National Soils Advocate. It was developed with state and territory governments and all key stakeholders, including, for example, National Farmers Federation, NRM groups, the Indigenous land managers, and others. And it outlines 3 key goals, and that's that we will prioritise soil health, that will empower soil innovation and stewardship, and that will strengthen soil knowledge and capability. And following the release of that strategy, the Commonwealth also released an interim action plan. And again, if you haven't had the opportunity to look at this, please do so, because it does outline how all the new budget measures that were put forward as part of the package interact with all the other programs across the Commonwealth and how they leverage off those programs, some of them established and some of them new. And that includes, for example, the soil carbon work that's being done out of DISA, out of Department of Industry, Science, Energy and Resources, and with the Clean Energy Regulator. And then looking forward, we're also working with the National Soils Advocate and the states and territories and the Commonwealth on a national action plan. And that action plan will articulate how we will take the strategy forward over the next 5 years. And so what that plan does is actually articulate the tangible actions both the Commonwealth and all the states and territories will do to get us to that improved soil health state that we want to see over the next 5 years. And drafting of that plan is already underway. So we're working with our key stakeholders to make sure that we capture their voices and understand their needs and can put that into tangible actions going forward. The other thing I just wanted to mention briefly is, as a part of the National Soil Strategy when it was released, the government also committed $200 million to various soil measures. And that package of measures that we refer to as the soils package is also to strengthen soil knowledge and to prioritise soil health and empower soil innovation. And so there's a number of components to this, and you'll see this in the bottom of that slide. We've got a little 3 columns there, and the first column talks about the data piece. And so this is all around data monitoring and sharing, because we know that we have a bit of a gap with soil data. And so what we want to do is we want to be able to review and understand the historic soil data that we have so that we can understand our state of Australian soils. And we also want to collect new data. And so with that knowledge, we'll be able to better understand what the gaps are, and we'll be able to work with stakeholders to fill those gaps. And so we have a number of data pieces underway. We have a review of historic soil data, which has already commenced. We also have a piece of work with the CSIRO, and I suspect they're probably on the line today, and that piece of work is for them to do an Australian national soils database. And then in addition to that, we're also doing some work around National Land Management Classification System. And when we pair the National Land Management Classification System with the soil data, we should be able to get a better picture of what's happening with our soils in Australia. And then in the second column, we'll start to talk about how we'll prioritise soil health. And that particular package of measures is built around the idea that we need to support people's careers in soil management. And so we have a measure where we are working to create an accredited registered soil practitioner package. And what that will do is it will give people an opportunity to learn more about soils, particularly soil sampling, and also how to interpret soil measurement and its results. And it will enable people to be able to use that knowledge in the field. It will certainly enable our agronomists and our extension officers to have access to the latest and most contemporary education in that field, including around soil carbon and its benefits. And then in addition to that, we also have, as you may remember, a soil monitoring program. Now we are just commencing that program soon. So we have soil extension officers that we did a grant round for. That grant round closed just recently, and there's going to be grantees awarded quite soon. And what those extension officers are going to be able to do is work with people on the land and assist them to improve their soil health, and also to assist them to access our soil monitoring program. And then finally, as a part of that, we've also got a piece around assisting with the cost of soil testing. And so we'll, in the new year, early in the new year, we'll be releasing a program where we will be able to access a program that will enable soil testing at a very low cost, and that will incorporate both the sampling and the testing of the soil, and that will be a full package that will enable people to also utilise the soil extension officers that are going to be on the ground helping. And all the data that we get from that program will be fed back into the database that I mentioned earlier. And then the final piece I just wanted to touch base on is around research. So as you may be aware, we have a number of kind of what we call wicked soil science challenge problems. And so one of those problems, for example, is the permanence of soil carbon. We know that soil carbon's a great thing, but we don't know how long it actually exists in all situations, for example, or the absolute effect of things like temperature and rainfall. And so what we're doing is we've had a grant round open where we've invited research institutions to put forward proposals to us, and we will be able to do some grants for them to be able to do work on these wicked soil science problems that we'd like to resolve. So that round closes on the 14th of February. If you're a research institution on the line, I'm hoping you're going to be putting an application in. All of the documentation's up on the web to support that process. So I guess my key message today is that together these measures will allow us to understand better how our soil condition is affected by different practices and interventions. It allows us to identify opportunities for improvement and investment. And it will allow us to continue to work together with our colleagues in DISA and across the Commonwealth to improve our soil health into the future. And then just in closing, I will note, as most people I hope on the line are aware today, that this is a very timely presentation as we celebrate World Soil Day this coming Sunday, the 5th of December. It was created by the United Nations to stress just how important soil is for the environment and for all of life. And so that's what I work to achieve every day. Thank you.
That's wonderful. Thanks so much. Do you, can you take maybe one question? We've got a question from Chris there. So asking about under the soil incentive grants, do the technical practitioners now have to take the samples, or are farmers able to do this?
So this one's still in development at the moment. We haven't actually released the specifications for it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. Please keep putting your questions into the chat. Anything that we don't have time to get to today, we will capture and package up and get the information back to participants that come along to today's sessions. Wonderful. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Please welcome our next presenter, Anna Whiten, from the Climate Change Division of Department of Industry, Science and Energy and Resources, and talking about the National Soil Carbon Data Program.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much, John. Yes, I'm Anna Whitten. I'm Assistant Manager at Department of Industry, Science, Energy and Resources. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Soil Carbon Data Program, which is an $8 million program that Paul mentioned earlier. And I'm also presenting after Lisa, so I can present a little bit about how our programs fit together and how we're aligning with the work of the Department of Agriculture, Water and the Environment in supporting the National Soil Strategy. So I'll just jump to the next slide there. Great. So in the National Soil Data Program is a relatively discrete program that, as I mentioned, sits alongside and aims to maximise data outputs and uses from our Australian government R&D and other programs. Our objectives are to support partnerships between scientists, industry and land managers to develop and validate measurement approaches to increase the collection and use of publicly accessible data for developing rapid and cost-effective technologies to quantify soil carbon stock and soil carbon stock change in Australian agricultural soils. A secondary objective that we see as an objective across government here is engaging land managers in the process by communicating location-specific results in a meaningful way. And that's particularly where land managers are being engaged in soil carbon collection activities, so soil sampling and things like that, and making that, that data actionable for them. I'll just jump on. Okay. So I'll talk a little bit today about our approach with this program, and the key elements that I'm going to outline are firstly around the fact that we're focusing on what targeted investments we can make in data collection and provisioning activities that have a maximum benefit for a range of technologies that support the soil carbon stretch goal. And we're also looking here at not only data itself, but also on enabling infrastructure. I'm also going to talk a bit about alignment, and that's really important for us. Again, as I mentioned, we're a smaller program, and we're going to be ticking along in the background between the National Soil Carbon Innovation Challenge and the programs that Lisa's just talked about. So we're really going to be taking an iterative approach in this program to find where the key gaps are and where can we make the most impact. And we're again focusing in around really on how do we improve the validation of technology so that we have systems for integrity. I'm also going to touch on a little bit some supporting improvements to FullCAM, Australia's full carbon accounting model that's used in our national greenhouse gas inventory, and some steps that are being taken to make that program more accessible with funding under the National Soil Carbon Data Program. Thank you. Okay, so here we're looking at the first stage I talked about is what are the key gaps for targeted investment? And here we're focusing on two things. Firstly, on data, and secondly, on those sort of capability and infrastructure type things. So the one thing that we've been doing in the last year is consulting with some experts, including engaging Federation University to undertake a desk-based review of public and private data sources that can be used in the development of soil carbon models. And as Lisa mentioned, there's a larger similar review that's going on under the National Soil Strategy. And of course, through the National Soil Carbon Innovation Challenge, we're hoping to see the full gamut of technological solutions to reduce the cost of measuring soil carbon to come forward. But for our purposes, we're kind of thinking at a bit of taking a step back and thinking about the main types of technologies that we think are going to come forward and how can we better support national data sets that can be accessed to speed up the process to test and validate those data. The images at the bottom just show the sort of spectrum of these types of technologies. From the left, from direct measurement through to proximal sensing, to which is looking at in-field assessment based on field deployable infrared sensors and lab-based spectral analysis, through to remote sensing, through to models and process-based or simulation modeling like our full CAM, but also the range of others out there. And thinking about how we can improve the accuracy of these different technology options at the farm scale. And for us, the priority in this program is delivering and making available high quality, directly measured carbon stock data that can be used to test the relative performance of those estimates that don't require that physical sampling. So that's what our priority is there. From next year, we'll be looking more closely at the capabilities and infrastructure. We'll move on next. I wanted just to dive in a little bit more into our thinking about what kind of outcome are we looking to support through this program and collectively with our colleagues at the Department of Agriculture, Water and the Environment, and also in how we can best support technology development through the National Soil Carbon Innovation Challenge. So what we're really looking to drive and facilitate is more publicly available data that can be used to develop and validate soil carbon measurement technologies, but also we're looking to find opportunities for data to be shared back into these publicly available repositories on soil organic carbon. So here we're not talking about kind of proprietary data on how your models or other estimation type approaches work, how you derive the soil carbon stocks in relation to those that would instead require digging up of soil cores. But we're interested in, if you're out in the field collecting direct measurements of soil organic carbon stocks, then as Ingrid outlined, we want to facilitate that data being shared in a common system so that more people can speed up the process of having that evidence base and defining certainty in relation to that data. How are we supporting this outcome? Do you want to click that one again? Okay, so 2 new data sources that we're supporting. The first one is, well, the second one actually is the National Soil Carbon Innovation Challenge, which I've just flagged. The other approach is a new project that we're commencing with CSIRO. So this is just in the scoping phases now, but what we're looking at, and Paul touched on this before, is going back to a subset of sites from the Soil Carbon Research Program that was conducted in 2009 to 2012. So we're looking at, with the program funding we've got here, at about 7% of those sites. And there's going to be, over the next few months, a site selection process that's looking really at a sort of scientific criteria of which are the best sites that provide good representativeness across Australian soils, but also mainly focused in which areas can we get the most high quality data that can support those range of technologies again. So that one's not looking so much at the sort of the research on what drives soil carbon as much as getting the right data that can help us collectively reach our goals of that soil carbon measurement innovation more quickly. And then finally, as I've mentioned before, really aware of broader work in the space for the National Soils Monitoring and Incentives Program in particular. So we're looking at some linkages there. So we'll jump on. Thank you. One thing we'd really be interested in here that we'll come back to in the breakout sessions is what else could be done to support this outcome. Are there other data sources that we could support? Are there other kinds of uses that you might like to think about? What are the benefits, opportunities, and risks that you see with like driving towards this outcome? Jump on again. As I mentioned, the kind of second phase for us is really looking in what are the sorts of infrastructure, enabling infrastructure and capabilities that we could support for Australia in proximal sensing, remote sensing. And we're also really interested in how to make the soil carbon data more applicable and kind of actionable to land managers on the ground. And as I mentioned before, this is something that will be more iterative as well, but we're looking to go out to tender for this one, for these different activities in the first part of next year. And then all of those activities will have further scoping and kind of consultation with relevant stakeholders in those fields. So we'll jump on. And I also wanted to mention the full CAM improvements that we're supporting through the National Soil Carbon Innovation Challenge. So our colleagues at the National Inventory of Greenhouse Gas Inventory developed reports using the full carbon accounting model, which is the calculation tool for modelling Australia's greenhouse gas emissions from the land sector. The public release versions of full CAM are currently being modernised and are due for completion mid to late 2022. This will replace the existing downloadable programs with a web-based application. This aims to allow users to access the system using different platforms, either via a streamlined user interface or via application programming interfaces or APIs, which will allow organisations to customise their interactions with full CAM. It will also ensure increased visibility of new full CAM releases for all users, allowing them to access the latest updates to Australia's calculations of carbon stock change caused by land use change, forestry, and soil carbon. My colleague Dan should be on the line from our inventory team from Melbourne. So if you have any questions, throw them in the chat and he should be able to answer them on that part because it's less in my field, but we work closely together. Or otherwise we can take your questions on notice as well. So finally, I just wanted to kind of piece that all together to have a look about how we see the soil carbon data program aligned with all these other activities. This is a really busy slide, so I'll give you some time to digest it with the PDF that we've sent around. But what I really wanted to flag for you here is that across the Australian government, and you know why we had Lisa with us here today, there's a lot of work and thinking that's going on towards increasing soil carbon in Australian landscapes and how we can draw on better pooling of data to inform how we identify optimal management practices in Australian landscapes, but also how we can ensure that we have robust accounting frameworks that recognise and reward that management impact. So the soil carbon data program kind of plays in the bottom space here. Oh, I might go back one, sorry. I'm trying to use John's system here. Bear with me. Cool. So the National Soil Carbon Data Program, it's okay, I can refer to it. You'll see it in the slides, but we play in the bottom space here with DISA underneath the Clean Energy Regulator that you can see goes across the middle band and the Department of Agriculture at the top. In terms of data sources, the Soil Organic Carbon Monitoring Project is smaller in scale than the National Soil Monitoring and Incentives programs that Lisa talked about, where they're drawing on existing data sets as well as driving collection of new soil data. And we're also looking at ensuring that new and existing projects under the ERF are eligible for those programs. We're looking at building in data into National Soils Information Systems. We're also having a look at those capabilities that I mentioned in this middle part, the tools of how we make use of this data. And then from an Australian government perspective, the kinds of programs that are involved in this include the ERF that Paul mentioned, the Innovation Challenge with data going in and out of that, Australia's greenhouse gas inventory and full cam, as I've mentioned, but also there's, the separate work that Lisa's talked about on their National Soil Science Challenge, as well as extension work, carbon plus biodiversity. So there's a lot happening, essentially. And what I wanted to jump to here is to have a think about this kind of, you can go for it.
Sorry.
As we get to the breakout sessions as well, consider like what might be missing here. We haven't really talked about the private data uses and interlinkages yet, but it's something we can think about as we kind of collectively move forward. And that's all I've got for now, but very happy to take questions.
Yeah, wonderful. So well done. Great job. And Chris is saying, yeah, well done on the slide.
Thanks, Chris.
Oh, and lots of applause. Great. So we do have time for a few questions before we take a little bit of a break and then go to our breakout groups. So Angela has a question here on, do existing long-term trials fit within the mix of data, capabilities, and infrastructure?
Ooh, I think, well, we've got a little bit of time. Just, Angela, do you want to speak to that, elaborate on that question slightly? I'm just,
yes.
I think it's probably within the scope of the programs Lisa talked about, but maybe ask a question and we'll see.
Yes, I mean, there is across Australia a wonderful network of, long-term trials going back, 80 years with different treatments. So, they're often kind of missed in the data, but also, the infrastructure sort of narrative. They have a great role in that longer term monitoring and understanding. So I was just wondering if they fitted in.
Yeah, thanks so much, Angela. I do think it's probably a little bit more in the camp of the National Soil Strategy's remit, but definitely would be interested in having a discussion about potential linkages in the soil organic carbon and measurement space, for sure.
So please go ahead and raise your hand or throw it in the chat there. Julia Mackay, you had a comment around the length of the grants and the work being done. Would you like to expand on that?
If you can't, if we can, I can jump in on that one, I guess, as well. If you weren't able to unmute yourself, Julia. Definitely, this is something we want to discuss in the breakout sessions, like what are some of the risks and challenges in this space, and time is a big one, and really cognizant that for soil carbon and increasing soil carbon stocks, time is a huge factor. So we're really interested in, again, when we sort of talk about that enabling infrastructure and absolutely the work that the Department of Agriculture, Water and the Environment is supporting along with CSIRO is how do we put in place the kind of systems that can take on board data and learnings about land management change as a result of these new activities and carbon stock change over time, so we can kind of get those things set up. But that's also why we're so interested in trying to get more data out there more quickly and more pooling of data so that the validation process can be quicker. Yeah.
Great. And a question from Annette here on will the state-based research and university experts be involved in selecting the 7% of sites to be remeasured? Thanks, Annette.
So in this one, we will be engaging nationally for the soil organic carbon monitoring project. If any of the folks from CSIRO wanted to speak to that, they're welcome to, or we can follow up separately. Thanks, Annette.
All right, team, well done, fantastic. What we are going to do is take a 10-minute break at this point, so you can go get a cup of tea, a biggie, and then come on back at 3:30. We will be going to breakout groups to have a little bit more of an in-depth open discussion and explore some of the opportunities, challenges, unintended consequences or assumptions across some of these programs or some of the missing links. Thank you so much, everyone. We will see you back in 10 minutes time. Please continue to add to the chat if you like. We will make sure we capture all of that. See you at 3:30.